Our guest today is someone who's obsessed with the science of teamwork. Shane Snow is an award-winning journalist, entrepreneur, and the best-selling author of several books, including the one we're focusing on today, Dream Teams, Working Together Without Falling Apart. And that's not easily done. So in it, Shane unpacks what sets extraordinary teams apart, from cognitive diversity and intellectual humility to the surprising power of constructive conflict. If you're a leader looking to build a culture of innovation, or simply someone who wants to be a part of a team that doesn't get along but gets better, this conversation is for you. Shane's insights are rooted in storytelling, research, and real-world examples that challenge the way we think about group dynamics. So let's get into it, Shane. Without that, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you for having me on the conversation.
And as I was talking to you off air, I have to tell you, this has been one of my favorite books I've ever read. You're a great storyteller. And the journey you take us on in this book, you know, we go around the globe. We're in Moscow. You're in Russia. We talk about sports analogies, even though you say you're not a sports guy. We did. Yep. I learned about the Wu-Tang Clan. I mean, just fantastic, fantastic job, Shane. Kudos to you, man.
Well, that is the most flattering way you could start an interview. Thank you for the compliment. As a writer, I mean, you know this, as an author, it's different than, you know, if you perform on stage, you can see people's reactions to your art or your work. As a writer, you don't see people's reactions. You maybe see some reviews, you know, online, and I ignore them. But it's nice to hear what a reader has to say. And I thank you so much for having read it and enjoyed it.
Yeah, when I teach classes, the same thing happens. I love the feedback you get from in-person classes. And when you go to virtual, nobody turns their cameras on and you don't get any feedback. Am I doing good? Am I not doing good? Are they getting it, not getting it? Is it funny? Is it not funny? It's hard.
Yeah. Yep. It is one of the interesting, I think, dynamics. I mean, you know, you deal with teams as one of your main things as well. It's an interesting shift in team dynamics as this move to remote and hybrid, of being able to gauge the nonverbals of your team and see if they are getting what you're delivering. That can be really hard, you know, when you're not getting the nonverbals because you're lagged, or cameras are off, or someone's looking over here because that's where their camera is, so you can't tell if they're they are absorbing it, but you can't tell. And we as humans, we pick up a lot of those cues. I think, now I'm just going to start rambling, but I think it's one of the reasons humans kind of won planet Earth is we're so good at picking up those nonverbals. It's what allowed us to work together in the first place.
Absolutely.
Hopefully we don't lose that as we get more technology in our lives.
We got to make a point not to, for sure. I was watching CBS Sunday Morning, I think it was, and they did an interview of an actress from England. I don't remember the name, sorry. But she was talking about being a stage actor in England and then being a stage actor in New York. And she says in England, the audience is much more reserved, but in New York, you really get the energy in the room, which is quite different. And then she's a director on films as well. She was talking about it's just as exciting for her as the New York shows, but it's different in film. So it's that interaction, that positive reinforcement, or sometimes negative, you're on the wrong track. You got to shift gears.
Yeah. Yep. You got to adapt. And the signals that let you know either you got to adapt or you're on a roll. Those are really helpful.
Yeah. They really are. So let's start off. I like to think of all my guests as superheroes, and all superheroes have an origin story. So what's yours?
Oh, wow. I don't know that I quite qualify compared to your other guests and to other superheroes, but my origin story, I grew up in Idaho. My dad's an engineer. He worked first on cars and then eventually at the Idaho National Laboratory working on nuclear reactors and fuel canisters for spent nuclear fuel. So I grew up with this very kind of engineering sort of education at home, take things apart, see how they work. He'd, call my brothers and I into the garage and be like, hey, this is what, transmission looks like. It's what I'm doing. I'm taking it apart. So I grew up with very much this kind of, this sort of learn how the world works and ask how the world works sort of mentality. And he put us to work on a lot of projects, flipping houses and construction and things that at the time I, hated. And now I look back on and I say that was part of what shaped my ability to think about like what's behind, the facade, in the world around you. How do things work on the inside, or wanting to know those things. And then my mom was, she was a teacher for the deaf. And then my family had 7 kids, and so eventually she couldn't. Very quickly, she couldn't hold down a teaching job, so she just taught us 7 kids, and now they have, I think, 15 grandkids. So my mom's a teacher and instilled in us a love of reading and learning. And I think that I just feel very lucky, if ever anywhere that I could be born in the world. I was born in, sort of a boring spot in Southeast Idaho to 2 parents who really put a lot of emphasis on learning and allowed me to go anywhere I wanted to be. I wanted to go. And I think, yeah, could have been born anywhere. Could have been born in an exciting city like New York, where I eventually moved to, or could have been born somewhere without educational opportunities or without, 2 parents who could teach me that. So I think that's really what I owe it all to is that. And then I think, yeah, being curious about the world allowed me to I think take the career path that I've taken and I think make the kinds of mistakes that lead to growth rather than kind of getting stuck. And there's lots of everyone experiences trials and tragedy and trauma, and I think that I have, because of that setup of my parents and kind of how just sort of I grew up, I've been able to have post traumatic growth rather than post traumatic stress, which again I feel very fortunate about. It's certainly not my doing. I was set up to be able to do that.
I was going to say that your background, well, my dad was not an engineer, but uh, I grew up in rural South Carolina, and I think that you're a team guy and I'm a team guy. And I think one of the things that both of us experienced was you probably, I know I did, and my dad was a serial entrepreneur. So I got a chance to meet and work with a lot of different people at a lot of different social levels and that thought differently. And so that forced me to understand how to communicate with, the mayor of the town, or, as I say in one of my books, the town drunk, right? Because they would come into my dad's liquor store and buy stuff. So you had to be able to communicate with everybody. And it's a great skill to have.
I think, I think it's a really interesting point, right? No matter where we grow up, we can fall into this sort of easy thing of just associating with and communicating with people who are very similar to us, have similar interests. And I think this is actually, there's business research from decades ago that I think led a lot of, the corporate world on the wrong track, which is research that said that people who have similar interests to you and similar lives, you're going to get along with better at work. Well, it turns out just getting along with people better and having the same things to talk about that you're interested in doesn't mean it's not actually the best thing for a team. Sports being an easy analogy, and like you said, I'm not a sports guy, but sort of obvious. If you have a basketball team and everyone is exactly the same, you're probably going to lose to the team that has players with different specialties. Someone who can shoot 3-pointers, someone who's fast, someone who can block better. If everyone is the exact same style, that's an easy team to defend against. And so it goes in business, and I think in communities and families. I have a big family, and we have different personalities, but we have a lot in common, and we benefited a lot from associating with people who were not exactly like us. And I think that's where, especially when I moved to New York as an adult, where I had the big aha moment of just meeting people from every walk of life who are all there to make it or to make something of themselves or prove something to themselves, and realizing that there's more than one right way to do that, and there's more than one right way to say something. People speaking all different language all from around the world, and my way of saying things and thinking about things isn't the only right way to say or think about things. Embracing that, I think, has certainly it led to a lot of the premise of my book Dream Teams. But it's sort of what you're saying. If you can have a conversation with the mayor and the town drunk, first of all, that ability to approach and adapt and see the humanity in everyone and speak like human beings is just the right way to roll. But second, you're going to learn something different from both those people, and that's going to enrich your life and probably your work.
And it all comes back to we're all people in the end, right? We're all human beings trying to survive another day. So what inspired you to write this book?
There were a few things. It's my 3rd book, and each book that I wrote was sort of like a years long process of me being interested in a set of topic. I was a journalist for a long time. When I went into business, I was an entrepreneur, kind of in between spouts of journalism, and I I would write about these things that interested me. I would use journalism as an excuse to meet people and interview them and learn from them. And I found myself kind of with this collection of themes and topics that were really fascinating to me. And my agent kind of described it as by the time you're 2 books in, when your agent's saying, what's your next book going to be? What ideas do you have? And he told me that as we were having these conversations about what I was interested in, what I was writing about, just on LinkedIn or for Forbes or for Fast Company, he described it as kind of the classic chipping away at the marble to find a statue inside. I was chipping away at these ideas and eventually honed in on what I'm really fascinated by is this idea of teams are the way that we accomplish anything that we can't do on our own. And very often the promise of a team does not sort of get fulfilled. I think back to school projects, you have 4 people assigned to do a project. There's the one who does all the work. I feel like that was me. There's the one who, does nothing and shows up on the last day. There's the one who kind of is there, but not helpful. And it's like, I could have done this project on my own. And of course, then there's some teams where obviously you can't do it all yourself, so in construction, you need lots of people one person is not going to lay the concrete foundation for a house, right? We need lots of human power, to accomplish the job. But it doesn't mean that you're moving faster because you have more people. Usually it means you're moving slower. And so at the same time, there's these classic stories in history, and in movies certainly, and I had seen it in my own life where it did feel like a team added up to more than the sum of their parts. It's that classic synergy thing, that Stephen Covey talked about in the 90s, right? Like 1 + 1 can equal more than 2. And so I was interested in this idea that sometimes that happens, but usually it doesn't. And yet we need teams. And so, my angle as a journalist had been psychology and neuroscience and human behavior as applied to business. So I had been looking at these different facets of, what is it about how we work together that allows us to do this and sometimes not. The other thing that was kind of in this sort of chipping away at the marble, actually where I really got started, was I became pretty fascinated with research about immigrant behavior, and sort of started with noticing the stat that cities in the United States that had more immigrants tended to have more patents than cities with a lower percentage of immigrants, and sort of goes from there. More small businesses, more entrepreneurs, more fear of crime, but not necessarily more crime. It's actually not correlated. More immigrants doesn't necessarily mean more crime, but it definitely means more small businesses. So I was interested in kind of those, that research of, people are afraid of people that are not like them. So, creates this sort of different dynamic, often with more fear. And yet there's something about people moving to a new place that leads to innovation. And then I started looking at that same idea kind of outside of sort of physical immigration and in sort of, I guess, in industry immigration, someone who works their way up as, say, an engineer, like you, and then moves into project management or moves into, game design or even politics. And what is it about, there's many, many cases where that is exactly the thing that leads to like a great breakthrough in an industry, is someone coming and applying their knowledge and expertise from some other industry. So kind of this intellectual immigration. And sometimes it doesn't apply at all. An engineer that, becomes a botanist might, ruin all the plants or whatever, or they might invent, a new way to keep plants alive longer or whatever it is. I'm making things up. I had some very specific examples that I was looking at, on game theory and on actually the invention of the super soaker by a guy who was he was an expert in basically fluid dynamics to help satellites move around in space and applying that to toys. So I was writing about these kinds of things and various case studies of that kind of behavior, and I realized that connected with this team thing of, amazing teams that do add up to more than the sum of their parts will tend to have people who have different journeys, who are bringing different mental models and mental tools to the team. And that gives the team more potential than than just having people who are all the same or all think the same. After that, you have to do something with that. You have to execute. You have to not fall apart. But that was the inspiration as I was writing about these topics and following these threads that I realized tied together around this idea of breakthrough teamwork.
Well, interesting aside, I've met the guy that invented the Super Soaker a couple of
Oh
times.
yeah,
He's in a
Lonnie.
group that I'm in Atlanta, so he's a fascinating guy. And in
I
your
love
book,
his story. Yeah.
yeah, it's great. And then in your book, kind of building on what you were talking about, the when you have multiple people come in, you have immigrants come in, you have more innovation. You mentioned that, and there's like neuroscience around your brain wants to put people into groups, and basically you're a part of my tribe. I trust you, but you're not part of my tribe. Innately, I don't trust you because I don't know you, and you might be out to get me. And then you talked about, it was another thing about voting. Actually, if you have a homogenous group, they vote less than if you have the other way around. I think you said you have a diverse group, they tend to vote less. But if you have a homogenous group, they all vote this, they all vote. So it's interesting how that all plays a role.
And some of this is you ask why. Basically for me, I hear these stats and I want to know why. What is it about, a community that has lots of people from lots of different groups that would make them want to vote or not? Like, it should be like voting should be this intrinsic thing. Like, your self-interest is to elect someone who's going to be good for your family and community. Yeah. And, one of the things kind of along those lines that I rarely talk about this chapter in the book, but there was this time in the early 20th century when in Buenos Aires, Argentina, there was this particular influx of immigrants from Europe and moving to Buenos Aires. And in particular, there were a lot of Jewish immigrants. And initially, you saw it's one of my favorite kind of case studies in history of this. Initially, what they saw was a lot of fear, a lot of people, sort of like even violence, but certainly like bad sentiment towards Jewish people in Buenos Aires. And kind of all immigrants. There were also a lot of Arab and Muslim immigrants. There were immigrants from kind of every country in Europe, but particularly it was the Jewish immigrants that kind of got a lot of flack from the local community. And it wasn't because they were committing more crimes. It wasn't because of anything, that you could put your finger on of like, oh, there was this bad story of a Jewish person, so now everyone's afraid of the Jewish people. It was just that they're different. They speak differently. They pray differently. They don't go to the same, it's a very Catholic country. And it sort of the neighborhood started to segregate, right? There's the Jewish neighborhoods, and they they moved together for kind of safety and just to be around people that were like them. And then what happened was something really fascinating is soccer started to get popular in Buenos Aires, and little Jewish kids would play soccer in the street with little Argentinian kids and other European kids from who were immigrants. And street soccer was the thing. It was like very poor neighborhoods. And when people saw their kids playing soccer together, it let sort of the pressure out of this sort of, balloon or ticking time bomb. And then adults started playing soccer together. And, Buenos Aires, for years and years, it may still be the case, had the highest percentage of people who play amateur soccer, in football clubs of any city in the world. It's the national religion became soccer, not Catholicism.
Yeah.
And what you see in the statistics around fear, around hate crimes, all of it went down. And the Buenos Aires now has the largest Jewish synagogue outside of Israel, I believe, or it did at the time I was writing about this 7 years ago. And the Pope hosted giant soccer tournaments in Argentina and talked about how amazing it was that their Jewish brethren were able to to be such great neighbors to them, and it was because of this game. And I wrote all about that in the book and was fascinated by the psychology behind that.
Mm-hmm.
How does that make sense? Soccer doesn't equal like suddenly we don't care about our differences in religion. Suddenly we're not afraid of people who we don't understand. And it didn't equal like Catholics going to synagogue and Jews going to Catholic church. It didn't really equal people like getting interested in each other's religions. It just made people see each other as human beings, which allowed them to work together, which allowed them to make their communities better. And the capital city better. And so, yeah, again, it's sort of a long way of getting around to saying it. But when you look at history, you see these examples of humans really doing teamwork right and overcoming, crazy problems or inventing crazy things. And you see lots of examples of it not going well. And underneath kind of those examples where we really beat the odds and transformed people's lives, you see these team dynamics that have to do with the psychology of in groups and out groups, who's on my team, and am I working for the team or am I working for myself, and, not working with them or working against them. And that's one of the building blocks, I think, of teamwork with trust is if you can turn your back on someone and they're not going to stab you in the back, you can get a lot more done.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that you can learn that you can turn your back on someone is by playing. And, play is sort of the simulation of conflict where it's actually okay. You can play soccer with someone, for months, you're going to trust them because you see them as a human being and you see how they handle themselves in adverse situations, and you don't even realize it that you can turn your back on them and it's okay.
I never thought about that as an analogy for trust, but yeah, I guess it kind of is. You learn how people are going to play, whether they're dirty or not dirty. Are they fake injuries or not fake injuries? Are they
sure?
The sportsmanship or not? Although in soccer, everybody fakes injuries, but
well, soccer's a funny example now because it has become over the last, I'd say, the first half of the 20th century was, all this stuff I'm talking about that, the soccer hooliganism and sort of crazy fan culture has definitely turned it into a bit more of a vicious game on the sidelines, which I don't love. But I will say you go to a bar anywhere in the world and you can start talking to someone about soccer and make friends with them. And that says something, I think, about human psychology.
Even if you don't even if your team is the opposite of theirs, they still share that bond of soccer.
Yeah.
They may make jokes about your team, but at least you're talking about the same sport, right? So
yeah. And the thing to click on this a little bit further, the thing that you see where that situation in the bar when you're talking about soccer goes badly is when you have a group of people who are like all the same. They're like, this is our group, we support this team. And the one or two people who are on the other team, and the strength in numbers, we are our group, you are the others, can turn into the fights. One-on-one, two people with very different, opinions on who's the best team can get along so much better than when the groups get bigger and we start to take sides. And it becomes this battle rather than this kind of intellectual conflict or, conflict of opinion that is fun, that could lead to, productive, understanding or, maybe even interest in someone else's team. I think that's where, the in-group, out-group thing comes together again. When we start to team up and say, they're not on my team. So this is not a fun conversation. This is a actual battle.
Yeah, there's one that comes to mind. I was working on a project in Brazil for the FIFA World Cup in 2014, I think it was. I think that's right. And obviously I'm in Brazil, so most of the team is Brazilian. We had one guy from Argentina on the team. And that poor guy, man, because Brazilians and Argentinians don't get along when they talk about soccer. But so they gave him a really hard time. But at the end of the day, though, they were in the same company. So they all worked together. So he was still part of the in group, as you call it. But boy, he was definitely on the edge.
It's it's too bad because I can see that it's, he's on the team for a reason, right? He's adding something. And I'd say probably adding something a little extra by being the only one that's kind of outside of that core group. And certainly when they go to a match in Senegal, like he's more on their team than when they're in the locker room, right? It's that classic proverb, me against my brother, me and my brother against my cousin, me and my cousins against the neighbors, me and my neighbors against, the other town. It's like that classic thing. Yeah. I will say, thinking about, what do we take away from that for, running a business or running a team of our own, even say, a soccer team, if you can create an environment where there is no one clear, overwhelming majority, that actually allows for a lot more productivity and less of the sort of not constructive conflict. If there's sort of a plurality of groups represented and everyone feels like they're on the one big team, but it's not like 80% of us are, clearly this group and the 20% are this group, you end up being able to have a lot more productive conflict rather than, kind of the picking on people or the things that aren't productive.
Yeah, for sure. Let's shift to a different sport for a moment, even though your book's not on sports. In the book, you do quote an organizational psychologist who says virtually all studies unambiguously reveal that individuals outperform teams in terms of both quantity and quality. But then in that same section, you give this example of that kind of seemed to disprove that with the Russian hockey team, also known as the Red Army, that dominated hockey for decades. But when they eventually broke up and moved into the NHL for different teams, they didn't really help their teams win. They weren't as good. Individual statistics weren't really good. But then the Detroit, I think, Red Wings in the mid-90s kind of got the band back together and put them all on that team, and that they won back-to-back Stanley Cups. So, what gives there?
Yeah, a great question. So that quote that you started with, it's specifically talking about brainstorming, about when you're trying to come up with ideas to solve problems or creative ideas, but usually it's about problem solving. Study after study shows that if you compare two brainstorming methodologies, one is individuals get a group of people and say, brainstorm ideas on your own about how to solve this problem. The other methodology is you get all those same people in a room together and say, brainstorm together on how to solve this problem. Very consistently, like overwhelmingly, kind of on average, individuals who brainstorm on their own, come up with ideas, do their own thinking, and then meet and combine their list of ideas will outperform the group that brainstorms and works together. And there's other places where this that dynamic happens. It's a lot of areas of collaboration where one person doing a job is going to be more efficient than a bunch of people doing the same job, usually. And yet there's these moments like this hockey story that you're describing where actually it's not the case, and it's rare. So in the story of the Russian hockey team, it's during the era of the Miracle on Ice, which that's that famous movie, is the time when the U.S. Olympic team beat the Soviet Olympic team in hockey, and it was a miracle because it wasn't supposed to happen because the Soviets had destroyed everyone for years. And what happened is the the Iron Curtain fell. Russian hockey players were now allowed to go and get very high priced jobs at Canadian and American hockey teams. So they all sort of split up. But there's this dream team of Russian hockey players that just beat everyone for years. Then they all went their separate ways and got these huge salaries. And none of their teams did really well in the NHL. And then the Detroit Red Wings got the old gang back together, or kind of the main sort of starting lineup back together, gathered these players from these different teams again until they had the core of the original team. And then that team, like you said, won the Stanley Cup, destroyed everyone once again. And, and there's kind of some magic to that particular configuration of hockey players. They, perhaps you could say, using the brainstorming analogy, if you put them in a room together, they would come up with better ideas together than they would have if you had them brainstorm on their own. Clearly, them on their own on other teams wasn't as good as them together. And so that's actually kind of the opener to the Book Dream teams. Is sort of the question of why. What was it about their team dynamic that allowed them to overcome this tendency for humans to not, to underperform, I guess you could say, their potential when we're together for necessary reasons versus when we're alone. And my core hypothesis is that it was the way that the team was incentivized and trained to work together. They had two very different instructors. They had this sort of militaristic, drill sergeant-like coach who was super strict. It doesn't sound like someone I'd want to work for, but super strict. And then they had this other coach who was very creative. He made them take dance classes. He made them take karate classes. He made them practice doing like ninja rolls, all of this stuff that, had nothing to do with hockey training.
While on skates, if I recall, in your book.
Yeah. While on skates, it took them out to the fields too to do ninja rolls, but they had ninja rolls on skates. And so they had this a diversity of physical training and of mental training that, other hockey players didn't have. And they also had this thing that was just a function of the way that the Soviet Union worked, which was they weren't getting paid if they made more goals or not. They were getting paid the same regardless, but their success, they stayed on the team. They got the perks of being, the Russian hockey team if the team won. There was no, you made more goals or you made more saves, so you get to go to a better team, you get a better salary like you had in the United States. And so when you were at this decision point of, do I pass the puck or do I go for the goal? There wasn't even this subconscious thing of, in America, you'd have this subconscious choice of, if I go for the goal and I get the goal, that's good for my stats, which eventually is good for me and my money and my reputation and all of that. And on the Soviet hockey team, there was none of that. It was, is it more likely that I make the goal or that he makes the goal if I pass it to him? So they had more passing. They had more actual team interplay than other hockey teams. And that was, it was that combination of things that allowed them to make it work. There was no extra glory if you were the one who saved the day. It was the team's goal only. So I think, that story is not about saying that communism is the best economic system for the world. It's not that at all. It was saying that the incentive structure of a communist hockey team led to the team winning being the most important thing, not your individual success. And that individual success is often what gets in the way of these group dynamics. So say in the brainstorming exercises or other exercises or situations where this inefficiency occurs, like you pointed out, you might hold back an idea you think that people will ridicule if you think that it will reflect badly on you. You might be more quiet. You might second guess yourself. Even if we say no idea is a bad idea, you might not explore an idea that sounds like a bad idea if you think that your status in the group is going to be at risk, even just a little bit, even subconsciously. If you're rewarded by being right, you're going to think twice about what you say or what you do. And you're going to try and take credit for when things go right. And you're going to try and deflect credit and not look at the full picture when things go wrong. And yet if you can take that away, if it's like, hey, us actually getting the best idea is the thing that matters. The only thing that gets you kicked off the team is if you don't speak up, if you don't put forward the bad idea. That is what leads to those outcomes. And there are many successful teams that come up with great ideas brainstorming wise, but it takes a particular configuration and dynamic to make it work.
So kind of what you talked about on the Russian team, I would inarticulately call chemistry, right? There was some chemistry there. And you say that in the book, the best teams don't just work together, they think together. So what does that look like in practice? Because we just talked about that if I'm brainstorming, I get better ideas if I brainstorm alone. But now we're talking about that we need to think together. So what does that look like in practice?
Yeah. So I think the starting point, and the reason I wrote the book the way that I did, with kind of the intellectual journey in these stories and these questions and kind of surprises, is because I'm convinced that the first big thing is actually just becoming convinced and remembering that these natural human tendencies work against us. Once you know that, hey, let's call a brainstorming meeting, that chances are that's a worse idea than just saying everyone brainstorm on your own. Once you know that, you're going to be much more deliberate about how you organize and how you get people to think together. So I think specifically, one of the things kind of tactics wise that I recommend all the time, I do a lot of consulting and speaking and kind of getting down to sort of very specific scenarios with companies, around this stuff. And one of the things that I recommend is before you have the group meeting where you're going to discuss the decision you're going to make, or you're going to discuss ideas, as a leader, take time to have one-on-one deep dives with every person who's going to be in that meeting, so you can extract more knowledge, more ideas. You can push people to dig deeper before they're in front of the group, where there's going to be those social dynamics that could lead to suboptimal outcome. It's sort of like it's seeding the conversation, but it's also, you can have a much more vulnerable, much more interesting conversation with an individual one-on-one where they're not worried about what everyone else is saying. As a leader, you can say, I have this idea that I think might be a bad pitch. I want to run it by you. What do you think? And, people might be hesitant about, is this a trap? If you're a person in power, but you do that enough, you reinforce that, and eventually people relax and you can start to go really deep. And you can even say things like, so I thought this was the way we're supposed to go, and I realized I'm wrong. I'm trying to figure out what a better solution might be. And I'm open to anything. Like, can we explore some ideas that you have, even if you don't think that they'll work? Like, maybe we can explore that. And and other sort of rhetorical sort of tactics, like when someone does say something that doesn't make sense or isn't going to work, say, why don't we explore that? What if that were true? What would happen? And kind of go down the rabbit hole with them. Doing that one-on-one with everyone who you're going to bring together first will lead to a much more productive conversation. So you're going to have that permission to, to speak up with things that, might otherwise be held back. And you're also going to come with a bunch of ideas that brainstorming has already kind of been done. You're thinking together one-on-one, and now you can think as a group and sort of whittle things down, have a debate, which is, the team game. In my opinion, the best kind of debate is the team game of let's find the flaws. Let's poke holes in this together. It was your idea. Tell us what could be wrong with it. Not, it was his idea and let's all pick on him, kind of as a team working through that. So the thinking together, sort of a long answer to your question. A shorter answer would be thinking together goes better when it's more of a explore and debate process than a sort of question and answer process, and sort of an idea and who's right, let's pick one process. And we tend to sort of naturally have the incentives wrong for that, right? The incentive is to be the one that has the right answer. The incentive is to be the one who doesn't have the wrong answer. The incentive isn't to say the thing that's dumb in front of everyone. And yeah, so that's I think the dynamic to be flipped. And like I was saying earlier, it helps if there's no clear majority group in there, because if you're the one person representing some group, say it's you're the one designer in a group of engineers, or you're the one minority in a group of people who are all the same in some way, you may feel pressure not to be wrong, extra pressure not to be wrong, because you're representing the entire design team, or you're representing that entire group, or you're the one woman in the boardroom, right? You don't want to say the wrong answer because you don't want this false narrative of, oh, it's because she's a woman, right? And so you feel this kind of extra psychological pressure. So yeah, that's why I think the tactics of depressurizing, the tactics of stocking the team with enough diversity in every kind of form that you think will help, so that people are not going to feel like they have to have this other motivation to stay quiet, or to have to be right, or to have to defend their position. The team winning being the most important thing should mean none of that other stuff matters. But inside of our little lizard brains, it tends to matter.
So one thing you said that I think is important for me, at least, was because when I first was thinking about this, I work with a lot of teams, and I don't think people are lazy or procrastinate, but they have more than they can possibly do. So I was thinking that if I asked them to come up with a list individually and then show up in the meeting, they're gonna write down 5 things on the way to the meeting, right? Not really think about it. And so the way you just combated that was you had the one-on-ones in advance, which is going to force them to think about it before the big meeting where everybody's together. So that's one key point that I took away. The second one you brought up was the debate thing. And in the book, there's a quote from somebody, I can't remember who it was, about the best people are the ones who can hold both sides of the argument in their head at the same time. And that's really what you're talking about is, you have this, if I create this idea, then I'm going to be really defensive when you say, let's poke holes in it. But if you say, Clint, this is your idea, so tell us what you think the flaws are. Now I get to poke holes, and then other people can join in, and it's okay. So from a safety perspective, I think that's a better way to go, like you were talking about.
Yeah, it kills 2 birds with 1 stone, right? It makes your ego protected, right? You're the one finding the flaws, so you're still the smart one. You're still okay. So it protects that, which just is going to make things go better. And it also, it helps you to explore, I use this idea of teamwork and problem solving is like exploring a mountain range in the fog. I use that analogy throughout the book. You can explore more of the mountain range if you're sort of pushed into looking at things from a different angle, and looking at things from the angle of someone who might try to shoot your idea down is going to help you see other things. And that is, it's also very satisfying, right? To have the aha moment of like, once again, like you're smart, like, oh, I see this now. That's great. And, with the holding both sides of one thing, I think like one of the main things that I end up talking about with real teams or real companies since publishing the book is this truth that all of the success and hard work and brilliant thinking that got us to this mountaintop that we're at can all have been great and awesome, and changing to do something new, to climb a new mountain, can also be great. And it doesn't mean that all of that stuff before was wrong. It might just need to be different now, but what got us here was right. and it's fine. And we are great. And we are smart. And we are successful. But that success and that thinking like, well, we were right and we were great can get in the way of seeing that there's another way now.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it's ironic. It's actually not like our flaw as well. It's a psychological flaw, but it's not like our lack of smarts that gets in the way of getting to that next level. It's actually the fact that we're smart gets in the way.
Yeah, I think the best I've ever seen that done is one of our clients. They do these strategy sessions when they go on for weeks, and they'll take one group and say, okay, you're the competition, so you go build the business case, and you go, why your product's going to be better than ours, and we're going to come back in, and we're going to defend it, and they're going to switch roles, and so it's really eye opening what you get out of those. And people, it's funny because people they'll work for company A, and yet they took on the role of company B and they start to defend company B and they get really angry. It's like, wait a minute, no, we're the better product. And no, you're not. You work for us, remember?
That's great. Well, I was glad to hear that you said that there's the switch in the middle, because that's, again, it's human nature. Like we get invested, we get emotionally invested
Yeah.
in our work and in being right. And if you're forced to take the other side, you have to let go of that emotional investment. And that reinforces that, like, oh, this exercise really is about finding the right thing, not me being right.
Yeah. So in the book, you actually, to me, it's not a far leap, I think, but you talk about cognitive friction and the conflict of ideas rather than people. How does that drive innovation?
Yeah, it's, this was one of the big, I almost named the book Cognitive Friction, or, productive conflict, because this is, I think, the kind of the main thing that just doesn't happen on teams that have all the potential. You have all the ingredients, you have the different heads thinking about things, you have the players who have the abilities, but you don't quite get there. And it's, an analogy that I use a lot is you're baking a cake. You're not going to bake a cake if you have 8 different types of flour, but if you get all the different ingredients, eggs and flour and chocolate and milk and all that, you're still not going to get cake if you don't mix the ingredients together. And that's what this cognitive friction is about. It's mixing our different ways of thinking together, combining our ideas, and having that intellectual battle out in order to make something better than just eggs and milk. And the thing that gets really hard about this is precisely what we were just talking about, is when things get personal, when it becomes about you, your ego, or your group defending your position, you being right or you not being wrong, or, in a disagreement or a debate, it can be about, proving you're better than the other person, or destroying the other person, or just proving you're right. That gets in the way. If we're going to be kind of practical about it, who is right doesn't matter at all. What matters is what is right. What idea wins, not whose idea won. Shouldn't matter. And yet that's where things are wrong. So if you can create a environment or dynamic where you can go hard on the debate or the argument or the disagreement, you can actually talk it through and explore it. And even if it gets, like hard, I guess, really hard, if you can do that without it turning into, I don't like you anymore because of this conversation, then that's where the magic happens. And so what are the ways that you can do that? There's various ways, but I think it's largely it's like a lifelong journey of maturity and wisdom thing for individuals, and for leaders, it's a leadership issue. It's recognizing when human beings naturally get to the place where they're starting to take things personal, or if you're starting to get angry, it means you care. But it might mean, if you're getting angry, that you're caring about how you look, or being right or not being wrong, or, your credibility, and learning to spot those signs as they happen and then taking the pressure away. Often it's, hey, let's take a break. Let's have some one-on-one conversations. Let's get back at it. Or it's, dropping as a leader the little things that you need in order to let that person feel okay. Let their ego be satisfied. Like, hey, what you said there, everyone pay attention. This is really valuable because this is pushing our thinking. Now, that's not the idea that's going to work, but this is the idea that's going to get us to that next idea. So thank you. Like that kind of acknowledgement to like redirect it from like the sort of defensiveness or all of that. I'm talking specifically about, arguments and debates, but there's this thing that I now notice, and then I encourage people and leaders to notice, um, which is when you see a disagreement, uh, notice when people start to try to prove that they're right versus, and when that happens, uh, you know, that's when you can jump in, or when people are disagreeing and trying to learn and trying to get things to that place of trying to learn is where the magic happens. But I notice this in my own work. When a disagreement happens, I will notice, okay, it's a disagreement, and I will say things like, "Hey, let's explore that," to sort of reset the mood from like, no, who's right or who's wrong,
Yeah.
or one person is sort of, hammering the other or talking too much. Like, I would actually like to hear what the other side of this is. Like, can we explore that? So turning it into that kind of group mountain climb. So yeah, that's the knowing that. And once again, back to what I was saying, knowing that that's how it works. That conflict helps us to see the things that we won't see on our own, and exploring ideas that are different helps us to get places that we wouldn't have got to on our own. But that when things get personal is when that falls apart. Just knowing that that's how it is means that we can start to approach or inject ourselves into conflict in ways that can sort of tweak it so that it is more about exploring.
I was on a project in Silicon Valley for a semiconductor company a few years back, and as a facilitator, you're trying to drive the conversation or facilitate the session, and these two engineers were just nose to nose going at it. I mean, and I'm listening, and I thought, I think they're saying the same thing, but they're just so they're so anti each other at this moment. So I finally got in and I said, all right, hold on. So you're saying this, right? You're saying that, right? You're saying the same thing, just using different words. And so it took them a minute, but they finally de-escalated down. Okay. But if I don't know where it would have ended if I hadn't jumped in the middle, because they were
Yeah.
fighting the same point, but they were just head to head, and sometimes you have to jump in and de-escalate things.
Yeah. I mean, I would believe that you're having, read some of your work, and yeah, I would believe you're a master at this. That's exactly it's totally normal. Like, I don't fault either of those engineers for getting
Yeah.
into it like that. Um, a lot of times the conflict we have is really about terminology and perspective, not about like the right thing to do. And when you can get rid of that, then you can be on the same team again and keep moving forward. I think also, in those moments, it pays to point out, especially when things have calmed down, it's like we are saying the same thing, it pays to point out like, hey, that's why we value both of you guys, right?
Yeah.
You have different perspectives, and you're coming at this from different angles, which is exactly what's going to get us further than if you both thought the same. Like, that'd be awful if you both thought the same. And we are on the same page now. Great. So let's use that energy to keep moving forward. And I mean, I think, more than anything, I don't deal with engineers as much as you. So I think the way that you frame that will either be not pedantic, or they'll roll their eyes, and they might roll their eyes at me. But if you know your audience, you'll say it in the right way.
Yeah.
When other people observe you do that, you jump in to help mediate that and get people to see, eye to eye. And then when you express that what is there, those different ingredients are valuable, when other people see that, it's going to make them more likely to behave in these ways that are productive as well. And to see you as someone they can trust, as their leader, of like, hey, this guy is not concerned with playing favorites, or, he's actually trying to make everyone better and help everyone save face and know that they're valued. It's such a huge part of the battle, I think.
Yeah. In that example, it was just two engineers that had the same thought, but they were just so engaged in the moment that they were angry with each other. But using my facilitation skills and translating between engineering and marketing, because their languages are so different. And so you have to kind of translate for them. But, what you talk about high performing teams. So what are some of you think the biggest misconceptions leaders have about building a high performing team? Because I think about, and I don't want to always go back to the sports analogies, but you have the dream team where I think back in Miami in the day, they had the big three, one of which was Chris Bosh, who went to college where I went to college. But those teams they did win a championship. You don't have five superstars typically on one team and they're going to win, right? So what do you think? What are the misconceptions? Is it I got to get a superstar on each position, or I need one superstar, or what do you think? And just don't talk about sports. Just talk about a team. You're building a team to do what you do. Because in the book, you talk about a company you had started, and there was a footnote. This is kind of the biggest problems we ran into was people working together or something like that. So
Yeah. Okay. So there's several misconceptions. I'll talk about a couple of the biggest ones. One, just briefly, I mentioned it before, the misconception that having similar interests will make you a better team couldn't be further from the truth. The more we think the same as everyone else in the group, the more blind spots we'll have, or the less people will speak up because they don't want to deviate from that norm. And so and this sort of goes together with kind of one of the big ones that I like to talk about, which is this notion of culture fit. We've been taught that culture fit it's one of the things that leads teams to go from good to great, right? And healthy culture leads teams to go from good to great. But culture fit, I think, is this sort of insidious thing because we can interpret it as everyone needs to be similar or the same. And this person who's going to provide a skill to the team, but is different than the rest of the team, we shouldn't hire them, is the exact wrong advice. Person who's different is going to add new ingredients. It's that same cake analogy. So one of my mentors years ago, his name's Charlie Kim. He ran a company, or I think still does, called Next Jump, which went from 200 people to like 2 people and then back up to hundreds of people. Had to go through this horrible downsizing, reinvention of the company. Kind of has these amazing stories of just leadership trials and tribulations, and having to do super hard things and persevere and keep going. And this guy helped me out early in my career as an entrepreneur. And he told me, you got to stop thinking of culture fit. Because I came to him with this question of, hey, this is one of my first startups. We've got this team, and I don't know. I have this person I want to hire, but I don't think she's going to fit in because the rest of us are all like 27-year-old men who went to Ivy League schools, and she's coming from a very different place, and she's going to, walk in and I think just not get along. And I don't think she's going to do a good job if she can't get along with all of us. And, and he told me, you got to stop thinking of this culture fit thing as the goal and start thinking of culture add as the goal. And like, yes, she is going to walk in, and she may not even take the job when she walks in and sees, that she doesn't fit. Yeah. But she's going to walk in and have this dynamic that you as a leader need to reinforce, that her adding to the culture is the point and it is what's valued. And then you need to immediately hire someone else who is not like the other 7 guys that you have, and to start to continue to reinforce this. And and he is also very kind. He's like, you hired people, your friends, who are a lot like you. It makes sense. It's how most companies start. It's fine. But deliberately now, you want to look for culture add, not culture fit. And I've kept that, for the last 15 years of, longer than that now, of my career. I've kept that in mind, and it makes, that the topic makes a cameo in Dream Teams, that our goal should be adding new ingredients to the culture. And what makes a good culture is trust and psychological safety. It's people being able to turn their backs on each other, being able to speak freely, being able to have the same conversation with one person that they could have with another person, and feel like they're being treated benevolently, or they will be treated benevolently. That is a great culture. Having things that you all aspire to and believe in is great, but different people are going to value different things. So you want to be careful about, the kinds of values that you say you all have, not stepping on the personal values or the personal, I think, perspectives or angles that someone could take. Simple analogy, we're talking about designers and engineers. If you're building a website and your designer and your engineer both value page speed over all else, you might get an ugly website that loads really fast. If your designer values user experience and your engineer values page speed, you're going to get a website that will load fast and people will use. And so you don't want to have your culture constrict your potential of what the ingredients can add. I think that's the biggest kind of misconception. And it's a subtle tweak to what we've been taught, but I think it makes all the difference. I think the other one, and I don't touch on this as much in the book, but on that subject of psychological safety and trust, like I get into it, but it's kind of the addendum that, when I do the second edition, I will write into the second edition. It's that psychology research shows us that humans trust or sort of try to earn trust and try to sort of get others to earn their trust a little bit backwards. We try to prove that we're competent, that we're smart, that we're capable when we're trying to get someone to trust us. And this happens when we're hiring people. We want to see their resume. You're trying to convince someone to work for you. We want to tell them how great of a boss you are, how successful you've been. The second thing, if we're thinking hard about trust, is integrity, doing what you say you'll do, honesty. We trust people because of that. So it takes time, but if I want you to trust me, I'm going to try to convince you I'm honest. But trying really hard to prove those things and neglecting the one other thing, which is benevolence, sort of undermines trust completely. Benevolence, it turns out, is the thing that makes or breaks trust more than all else. Because if someone is extremely capable, they always do what they say that they'll do, but you don't believe they will be kind to you or treat you well, or you think that they will do something that benefits them over you, even if it means stepping on your head. Doesn't matter if they're honest about that. Doesn't matter if they're extremely capable. In fact, the more capable they are, the worse it is. I call this the Terminator principle. Terminator is good at everything. He also always does what he says he'll do. He's a robot. He says he'll be back, and he came back like 9 times. And yet you wouldn't trust him if he's not on your side because he's there to kill you.
Yeah.
And so that is the thing with teamwork. It's not about convincing each other that we're capable. It's convincing each other that we're going to pull through for the other person, that we care about them. That if we have a disagreement, I'm still going to consider you as a human being, and I'm going to treat you like that. And I'm going to try and work it out rather than use that disagreement to get rid of you or to ignore you or step on your head or whatever else. So those, I think, building trust is about benevolence, and team culture is about what you add, not what you fit.
Yeah, interesting aside, I saw an interview with Arnold Schwarzenegger recently. I don't think it was a recent interview, but I saw it recently. And he said that he thought that "I'll be back" was a stupid line. And I think he went to the director and said, "We shouldn't do that." And I'll paraphrase here. The director basically said, "How about this? I won't tell you how to act. You don't tell me how to write." And so, and he said, of course, now it's the famous line, "I'll be back." So,
yeah.
But he didn't want to say it.
That's funny. Yeah. Do you remember in the interview, did he say he was glad?
He said he was wrong. Yeah, for sure. He said, obviously I was wrong.
That's great. I mean, that is, I think, the other quality of leadership that, I end the book with this intellectual humility thing. Someone who is in a position of power, or, in his case, he was a governor, and, he's like a very popular, anything he says, people pay attention to. Even now, just as an actor, like he's a celebrity. Admitting that you're wrong, admitting that you changed your mind, admitting that you could be wrong is such a powerful thing for leaders. Like, we have this misconception that the leader needs to be perfect so that other people can aspire to do that and they can be perfect. But actually, being adaptable is so much more valuable. And if you give people permission to be wrong, obviously, like, if it doesn't come with confidence to be wrong always and never helpful, that's a different thing than trying to push the team forward. And you roll the dice and you're wrong about that. Giving people permission to do that is so powerful. And if you're the one with the power and you do that, it sets a remarkable tone. So kudos to Arnold. Never thought I'd say kudos to Arnold in a public setting, but kudos to him.
What are some of the dangers of groupthink, and how can we, as a team, proactively avoid that?
Yeah, groupthink is a tough one. The main danger is that you miss something important, right? And it's like we're in a raft and there's a waterfall coming up and we miss it. The second main danger is that someone does see the waterfall and they don't say anything or they don't speak up because the group think they're convinced that there must not be a waterfall because everyone else says there's no waterfall or no one else sees it. So I must be wrong. Sort of this, self-gaslighting thing. But yeah, groupthink is this phenomenon of a group of people. The longer they are together, they work together, the more shared thoughts they have, the more shared opinions they have. And, it's not along every dimension, but say it's a group of people working together. You might like different basketball teams, you might like different TV shows, but you all think that this is the right way to solve this problem forever and ever. And, and the longer you work together and the longer you're successful together, the harder it is for that group to think outside of their own box. And I think there's this sort of funny psychological dynamic to it of when you look around and you see that everyone looks like you, you can tend to behave like, well, so we all think this thing that I think, right? And especially if you have any kind of power in the situation, or if you're dealing with someone who's shy, or feeling powerless, you're not going to get like the pushback of like, well, we don't all think this way every time, right? And that's one of the dangers. If someone does see the waterfall, or they see that mountain that you could climb, but they don't speak up because they're like, well, I guess everyone does think this way. There's more to groupthink than that. And I'm not the world's biggest expert on it. There's been some great books written about it, but that's, I think, the crux of it is, okay, so here's where my kind of stuff rolls in on top of the groupthink research. We tend to think, most of us, that it's a failure if the team splits up, or it's a failure if someone has to leave the team, or a few people leave the team. And the groupthink phenomenon actually, I think, shows us very clearly that might be the only way the team can continue to climb the mountain, is if something changes in that group of people who, we've worked together for a long time and we've now coalesced around a similar set of ways of thinking. We need to inject new thinking. And that might mean someone has to go. It might mean we need to, become comfortable with some discomfort of bringing some different people in. And it might be that, hey, this project is done, so let's disband. And when the next project comes, let's cast a different group of people, some from the last group, some new ones, so that we make sure we don't just solve this next problem exactly the way that we solved the last problem. And so that's the kind of the main thing from my work, is that once you let go that the team has to stay together forever and ever in the same configuration, then it opens up possibilities, and that helps prevent us from devolving into groupthink.
Yeah, just like your hockey example. I mean, the same five didn't play forever, right? You had a
Right.
new one that came in and got acclimated into the group. I think I've seen some visual studies on there'd be a team in the room and this person would watch everybody pick the wrong thing, and they had the right answer, but they were like, I guess I'm wrong,
Mm-hmm.
because and
Yep.
they would know they're wrong, but they would still pick the other one because everybody else had picked it. So, that's
Yeah.
the other danger. If we all think the same, maybe that one new person doesn't want to say anything because they're like, clearly I must be wrong. Everybody else has been here and been successful and they're picking the other thing. So I got to pick that one.
Yeah. It would take, in that scenario, yeah, I'm familiar with that study. It takes a very specific rebellious personality to say, no, you guys are all wrong and I'm right, in a setting like that. And most of us don't have that rebellious personality. I think we need one of those people once in a while on our team. But yeah, it's rare for that to be the natural way that you would respond in that scenario.
Yeah. Now you have so many stories in the book, as I opened up with, you took me on a journey all over. It was amazing. Is there anyone that's kind of your favorite, or one that surprised you the most?
Oh, that's my favorite that surprised me the most. Yeah, it really was. It was a journey. You know, I think, I really liked, so yeah, the story of Malcolm X, which is in the second to last chapter. And his is a story that's been pretty well known. There's a great movie that's been made about him. There's been some great books. Uh, I used his story as a vehicle to introduce this idea of intellectual humility. And, the chapter is called How Malcolm Changed His Mind. And I was kind of familiar with the surface level history of Malcolm X, and unfamiliar with kind of the deeper history. And there's a scholar named Manning Marable who wrote about his reinventions. I think he actually had a book called The Reinventions of Malcolm X. And what happened in Malcolm X's life is he kind of had two very dramatic personal transformations of his whole belief system. First was, he grew up in sort of had a rough upbringing. House was burned down by the KKK. When he was a kid, his dad was killed. He went to jail, and he had this. And in jail, I think his nickname was Satan or something like that. He would, a problem kid, you could say. I think he was like 18 when he went to jail. I'll probably that detail slightly wrong, but he was a kid still.
Yeah.
And then he converted to religion, and sort of changed his life around, stopped substance abuse, and became a fiery preacher who helped a lot of people, and totally transformed his life. Became very famous for this kind of period of his life. but what he was doing, and the religion he had was kind of this fundamentalist, religion that was quite advocating of violence, and was, there were problems basically with, what he was preaching. And yet there was so much good to what he was helping pull people out of these really hard situations, and became this very famous character, very well known in America. He's on the FBI's radar for like how, dangerous of a thinker and figure he was, public figure. And he was sort of the foil to Martin Luther King, who was, preaching nonviolence and
Right.
love as how do we, change, this horrible situation with race in America and racism in America. And they were sort of these two foils. And then Malcolm X went to Mecca to do the Muslim kind of holy pilgrimage, and he had this second breakthrough where he saw people of all races, all classes, praying together. And they were all the same, kind of all worshiping the same, even though they were all very different. And that kind of broke his brain again. And he then converted to a much more peaceful religion, where he sort of took all of this sort of independent, strong, sort of fighter stuff from his past and used it to become a preacher of nonviolence. And that became the Malcolm X that, changed the world that everyone, knows about. And, and he was sadly murdered, and, but he ended up preaching equality in a way that was like amazing and transformative. And his ideas helped shape Martin Luther King's ideas. And I think Martin Luther King helped shape him as well. But learning about how this man with so much anger found religion and changed his life, and then still with anger, but this very prestigious sort of huge following, changed his life again, even though it meant that he would be killed by the people who he'd left behind.
Yeah.
Is just super brave, and it points to kind of what I think is sort of the really incredible potential that we have as human beings, which is if we can transcend our current knowledge with something better, and if we can do that despite the odds against us and despite the stakes, that is what leads us to change our lives, but also to change others' lives. Sort of that climbing of the mountain. Malcolm X needed people like Martin Luther King as like, foils pushing back on the way that he was thinking. He needed other people and how they came together to worship and what they taught him. I'm summarizing his journey in like very, very sort of high level, but he needed all of those people to become this reinvented person several times that then would help so many other people. And I think that's what we as leaders need to think about in our lives is, there's a lot at stake if we change our minds in dramatic
Yeah.
ways. There's a lot at stake if we transform and upgrade ourselves to new ways of thinking or new ways of doing or being. And often there will be pressure from other people in our in-group to not do that.
Yeah.
And if we can do that, we can teach other people that it's okay to do that. And that's how we get better together. That was probably the most dramatic and eye-opening kind of history lesson I went down in researching this intellectual humility thing, which is about adaptation and growing when growing is hard.
So let me ask, I'm going to see if I can squeeze one or two more questions in before we wrap up. But so how does what we talk about in Dream Teams, is it affected at all by being remote or hybrid, or does it all work exactly the same, whether you're face-to-face or if you work in a remote hybrid environment?
It's certainly the case that I think you've been hearing me make is that there's a lot of human behavior dynamics afoot with teams that make the difference. And it's a change of dynamic when you're working remotely, when you see each other over a screen, or when you don't see each other, but you're on a screen, hearing each other. Those are different social dynamics. And so, yes, it's different whether we're in person or not. Whether it's better or the same is going to depend on how we navigate those dynamics. So let's say you have the same team and it has all the right ingredients. We have everything to make the chocolate cake. And that team is going to mix together in person at the same office every day, see each other. There's going to be a lot of side conversation and social interactions and nuances that you can cultivate or have, depending on how that office, or let's call it an office, is laid out and structured, right? If classically Steve Jobs put all the bathrooms at Apple headquarters all in the center of the building, so people from different departments would have to cross paths. There's a design or a thoughtfulness to like the office layout that could lead to isolation or intermingling or distraction. If everyone has offices and you never talk to each other, you may as well be remote. That's different than if you have ways to kind of interact and have those small moments, those micro opportunities to include each other or to build trust. When you're fully remote, you have less of that serendipity. So, and you also are losing a lot of the nonverbal cues that can build trust or help you communicate better. So you just got to work harder to get those things. And I think ultimately it is trust that sort of suffers when we're not face to face. We don't look at each other in the face. We don't have sort of the little conversations that help us see each other as human beings. When you're hybrid, I think you get a good best of both worlds. Again, if you're deliberate, if when you're in person, there is the kind of design and leadership for people to interact and, get to know each other, see each other as human beings without, ruining the workday with just, it's all fun and water cooler chatter. And then when you're over a Zoom screen or you're on Slack or Teams or whatever it is, you're treating each other with that, humanity. That's great. I think that could work very effectively. If you're fully remote or you're mostly remote, as a leader, I think you need to set people up to see each other as human beings and to build that trust. And how you do that is going to be kind of how you conduct those meetings that you have everyone together, how you in the group chats interject and weigh in and encourage things, and those one-on-ones that you have with people and one-on-ones that you encourage people to have with each other. Not every team is working on projects where a lot of that matters. Sometimes you can do your work in isolation and it doesn't. You're just throwing something over to some other team, but most of the time it is the team dynamic that's going to potentially get us further than not. And so, yeah, long story short is the more we can look each other in the face and see each other as human beings, the more trust we're going to have, the more we're going to believe in each other when things go wrong, the more we're going to be able to have those hard conversations, whether they're over Slack or in person. And so that's the goal, is to get people to feel like they're on the same team and they're all humans and not just an avatar.
What's a commonly overlooked trait in great team members?
I think the ability to recognize other people's superpowers and acknowledge that, I think is overlooked, especially if you're not the leader, right? As a leader, like you might have hired people for their superpowers, but it's not even, I think, like specific skills. It's like, is this person particularly empathetic? Is this person a systems thinker? Is this person, particularly able to lighten the mood, when the mood is tense? Recognizing those things in people and drawing them out. So the person who's empathetic, say you're working on something that's tough, and you're like, hey, we could use that empathy in the room, inviting that person for that reason to like weigh in on something. That ability to kind of recognize that and invite people, I think is underrated. Second thing kind of along with that is the ability to recognize small opportunities to make people feel valued and included. You get into the elevator and you see, your close colleague that you love chatting with, and you chat with them, and there's another person in the elevator that you don't chat with. Recognizing that as an opportunity to bring them in or to greet both people. Some people naturally are great at this, and some people, anyone can do it. Once you start noticing those micro opportunities. But I think it's a really underrated thing, because saying everyone's valued and we want to include everyone and you should speak up and you're here for a reason, saying all that, or building up some big event, like we're having like a big whatever offsite where this is what I want everyone to believe, this thing doesn't work nearly as well as taking 10 opportunities a day to reinforce it by acknowledging people, thanking people, including people, pulling them in. And that behavior is contagious. So I think that's in sports, you could say it's the player the glue player, the player that recognizes this person is great at 3-pointers, so I'm going to pass it to them right now. This person is great at dunks, so I'm going to pass it to them right now, rather than just taking the ball and going for it yourself.
Yeah.
I think it's totally underrated.
So if listeners can walk away remembering just one idea from Dream Teams, what do you hope it is?
Oh man, there's a problem with this book is it's chock full of ideas.
I know, right? I'm telling you, it's a journey. They should all read it cover to cover because it's a journey. It's great.
I say the one idea would be when there is disagreement or conflict or difference of ideas, say, let's explore that. Turn the conflict into a group exploration. Even just the phrase, let's explore that. That's the takeaway.
Yeah.
I think that idea is crazy. Let's explore that.
Yeah, exactly.
I disagree. Let's explore that. That's the number one.
I would never thought of that. Let's explore that.
Exactly.
So what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
The best piece of advice I've ever been given. Well, I'll say the thing that comes to mind that's sort of the best piece of wisdom, maybe you could say, comes from my dad. People are more important than stuff. I think the world would be a better place if everyone could repeat that every day.
Yeah.
I find myself repeating that all the time when I'm frustrated, when I'm like, that just costs a lot of money, or this is a big inconvenience. Now I'm going to have to replace that. I have a 2.5-year-old. So it's like, you can imagine, like, that thing just broke. There's crayon on the walls. People are more important than stuff.
Yeah.
Is at the end of the day, whether we're talking about family and family life, or we're talking about our team, the people we work with. Yeah, that's the one.
Just so you know, I have an 18 and a 15-year-old, and the stuff gets more expensive, by the way. So sometimes it's hard to remember. Oh, yeah. He's more important than that switch he just broke, but okay.
Oh no.
Well, Shane, prepared. This has really been great, man. If people want to learn more about you, engage with you, how can they do that?
Thanks for asking. So shanesnow.com is my website. Kind of find all my stuff to read, stuff to kind of engage with. My contact info's there. I do a lot of public speaking. So I'd say if anyone's listening to this and they have a leadership team or they have a conference, check out my speaking page. I have a new potential book coming up that I have some new stuff I've been writing about. You can find on my site, and I'm speaking about as well. So that's just my website. It's just my name.
And the book is Dream Teams. Highly recommend it. Working Together Without Falling Apart. In the back, he also has some links to different places for resources. So really good stuff here. Really appreciate your time today, Shane. Thanks so much for the conversation.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.